Well, hello everybody. This is Hal,
And this is Melanie.
and we want to welcome you to another episode of Making Biblical Family Life Practical. And this week we're coming to you from North Topsail Beach, North Carolina.
Where we've been at a church retreat, which has been so much fun. It's been fun to get away with everybody and to talk and to get to know one another. But one thing that has come up on my radar, Hal, is I've talked to several people in the past just month
Mm-hmm.
who have estranged family members. Adult kids who haven't spoken to them in years, parents who haven't spoken to them in years, and it grieves me. It's made relationships get right at the forefront of my mind.
And this is the time of year when traditionally families are gathering together, even those who are not on the warmest of terms. And so it seems appropriate to be thinking about that because, this week coming into Thanksgiving and all the rest, there's opportunities there, opportunities to do well and opportunities to stumble maybe. And so,
There really are, and there's kind of several levels there.
uh,
There's relationship with each other as husband and wife,
right,
the relationship with our kids, and then the
right,
relationship with our extended family.
mm-hmm,
And there's kind of opportunities and pitfalls in each during the holiday season. The opportunity is we're going to spend more time together.
mm-hmm.
Our extended family's coming in, all of our adult kids are coming into town, parents, grandparents, we're all going to be gathering this week. We're going to be gathering several times over the holidays.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's an opportunity there. There's an opportunity, I remember someone once said, every time you speak to someone you love, you have an opportunity to make that relationship a little bit stronger or to make it a little bit weaker.
Well, I think it was Stephen Covey talked about like an emotional bank account in relationships that when you have positive affirming kind of interaction, that's like making a deposit into that account. And the times when you're under stress, and sometimes it's unavoidable, there's times when you have to draw down that account. That times are difficult, people have to make sacrifices or forgive something, and you really want that account to be balanced on the positive side, to say that one shock is not going to sink the boat.
We've got to make sure there's enough in that relationship bank account to pay the bills when they come due.
Yeah, because there will be difficult times. That's just life in a fallen world.
I think one thing that it's important to think about as we move into the holiday season
Hmm.
is stress and the effect that stress can have on our relationships.
Hmm.
Because we're busy. I'm cooking for 16 people this week. You
Yeah.
know, we're busy, and also we've got Black Friday coming up with our own businesses
Hmm.
sales, and so yeah, my stress level is pretty high, and I think I remember you saying that stress was like water.
It'll find every crack in your character.
Yes,
Yeah.
if there's the slightest
Hmm.
crack in your character, it'll come pouring out.
Well, the thing that comes to my mind is what they taught us when I worked for the power company. They talked to us about error likely situations, times when you are under stress, when the situation is unsettled or uncomfortable or non-optimal in some way, and recognizing that that means your decisions are going to be a little more questionable, that you've got a greater opportunity of making a tragic mistake. Now, the power company, we talk about killing somebody, energizing a line while somebody's working on it. That would be a fatality. But sometimes we have relationship fatalities too, and
Yeah,
and y- you know, being aware of the fact that this is, I mean, a joyful occasion. We're going to celebrate. We're going to celebrate Thanksgiving. We're going to celebrate Christmas. We're going to see relatives that we haven't seen for a while, or kids coming home from college. That's a joyful thing, and yet it is outside of our normal routine. It does present an unsettling aspect, and we need to recognize if we're not careful, we can make a serious mistake. We are in an error likely situation, even if we don't intend it. And so, just being aware of that to say even in the joyful times of life, if the situation is different than our everyday lives, we need to be on guard. We need to be on our best behavior.
yeah, we need to keep that in our mind. We need to make sure that that's part. that's on our minds, even in the midst of stress, that when I'm rushing around the kitchen and the kids are helping me, that I'm thinking about the way I'm talking to them.
Hmm.
That I'm considering it. A verse that really helps me
Hmm.
is from Proverbs 31. Proverbs 31:26. It
Hmm.
says, "The law of kindness is on her tongue."
Hmm.
And I'm going to choke up thinking about this because I've thought about it so much that kindness needs to rule my tongue like a law.
Okay.
That the law of kindness is on my tongue,
Mhm.
that I do not break that law, that I make sure that even if I have to rebuke, that I do it in a kind way.
Right.
That even if I have to have a disagreement, that I do it in a kind way.
Hmm.
And I want my children to think about that. When they read that verse, I want them to think about me.
Hmm.
I want them to think that was my mama. And y'all, that's not natural for me. Anger is natural for me.
And
I
right. Right.
I get angry so easily. And that's what my flesh would do. My
Hmm.
flesh would pop off. How could you?
Right.
And yet the word says that the godly woman, the law of
Hmm.
kindness is on her tongue.
That's just the basic principle of her conduct.
Yes.
That's just the mark of her character. She's a
It's the
woman who's
natural law of
that
her character.
that's
This
yeah.
the it's overreaching.
It's like the law of gravity that you
Yes.
can just depend that she's going to be kind no matter what. And yeah, and that's real. One thing that I thought about this past week, we all have kids, and maybe sometimes we have our own tendency. When they get under stress, they get dramatic. And I don't mean melodramatic in the sense of woe is me, but in the sense of, oh, there's a problem. We have a crisis.
A huge
You
problem,
know,
a giant problem. It's not really a giant problem, but it
and
becomes big in their
and
minds.
I made this observation to some of the kids the other night. I said, my experience tells me that you almost never improve a situation by adding drama to it. There are dramatic
Yes.
situations.
Yes.
Sometimes there are things which are, help, the car is on fire. That is dramatic.
Yes.
But taking a situation and boosting the drama, making it more crucial, more critical, more stressful, really doesn't help
No, it
anything.
doesn't.
And so, that's something to be aware of because when we get under stress, maybe it's the stress of cleaning up the house or the stress of
Oh, we're about to
getting all
face
the,
that. We've got everybody coming in the next couple of days. We're about to have some serious.
and this is like a serious crisis, okay?
It
Right?
feels that way.
Well, it's easy to slip into that. And so,
And so I have to, before I speak to my children, before I speak to you, honey,
no,
I have to take a couple of deep breaths. And
uh,
when you do that, you get more oxygen in your brain, which helps you think.
right.
It makes you take a second and think, is what is coming out of my mouth glorifying to God and going to build this relationship, or is it going to make things worse?
One of the hallmarks of mature adulthood and Christian character, I think, is the ability to put yourself in another person's mind, to think to oneself, how is this going to sound to the person I'm about to speak to? Try to train our kids to do that. It doesn't come naturally. It's not something that small children just aren't capable of taking somebody else's perspective.
And, I think something we have to really be careful of as parents is we get angry and we want our children to change something. And we think that we're going to motivate them with our anger and our smart mouth.
Uh-huh.
And yet the Word of God says, the
Hmm.
wrath of man works not the righteousness of God.
Hmm.
God promised us that our anger would not end in righteousness. And if our goal is for our children to be righteous and to do what's right, God promised us our anger was not going to do it.
Well, we want to be righteous.
We
Not
do.
so that we win, but rather we want to be pleasing to God. We want to have character that is God honoring, therefore righteous. And of course, the Lord is our righteousness. I mean, ultimately our righteousness before God's judgment throne is the righteousness which he gives us. But our daily conduct, we are called to act in that fashion, to seek after it, to pursue peace and pursue it. And
By the way, that's James 1:20.
yes, yes, about the wrath of man.
Yes.
And so, we need to be striving after that. And
And we need to realize it's not going to accomplish what we think it's going to accomplish. Neither is belittling or name calling. Sometimes we talk to people whose parents tried belittling them and calling them names and and anger in managing them, and it deeply wounds them.
well, I think, speaking as a man, I know that I had examples in leaders in my young life that anger and sarcasm and criticism were just their tools in the trade. And, some of those I respected, and some of those, taught me important lessons. Coaches, band directors, teachers of different sorts. But at the same time, I have to recognize that the relationship you have with that outside person is different than the one you have with your parents.
It is.
To say if the coach calls you a bad name out on the field, you get mad with him,
But
and
my mama still loves me.
but it doesn't hurt the same way as feeling like this is the person who I should be able to trust and who should be loving to me, and I should feel safe around my parent, and this parent is like tearing into me unjustly or speaking unkindly.
And I think lots of times the parents mean well, Hal. I think moms in particular think, "Oh no, I don't want to give them a spanking, so I'm just gonna fuss at them. I want to be merciful." But we
Well,
forget that, I got plenty of spankings growing up. I don't remember what it felt like.
no.
But words can be replayed and do the same damage that they did the first time all through your life.
And a lot of times you have no idea how those words are landing with your child because they
No.
may not show it. You may stumble into something that they have a deep-rooted fear about that they haven't even been willing to discuss with you. And then if you lash into them with that, that might just destroy something inside. And
And
s-
here and
yep.
we're talking mainly about little kids,
Mhm.
but
Well, I'm not.
yeah.
I'm talking about older kids.
Well, but I'm thinking,
Yeah.
let's talk just 1 second about adult kids.
Okay, let's do.
You need to be really, really careful with those kids that are 17, 18, 22, because y'all, they can walk away and you may
Mm.
never see them again.
And unfortunately, we hear the stories,
All the
and
time.
and not just from people out of the thousands at a conference, but I mean people in our circle of friends, people close up and local who have kids who have just for one reason or another have taken offense, whether it's the parents' fault or something else. They've taken offense and they have cut off the communication. They have cut off the relationship. That is like an emotional fatality, and we need to be sure. You know, you know, to some extent, we can't be responsible for others' behavior, especially as adults.
But
But
as the older adult, the more mature Christian, we should be the one building up and repairing and restoring relationships, not destroying them.
let's make sure that at the very minimum, we are not causing offense. We're not
Yes,
that if anybody's angry with us, then it is an unjust anger.
right.
That's not something that we have provoked. And so, yeah, so we need to be aware of that kind of thing. And that I think you make a good point. I mean, you're talking little children, you're talking big children, you're talking adult children, and the way that you discipline them has to change as they grow and mature. But relationships can be destroyed at any point.
They really can. And folks, I don't want any of you to go through the pain that we have seen in some of the folks that we've counseled with and talked to. I don't want you to go through that pain, the pain of a broken relationship with your child,
Mm.
because I just it's worse than death in some ways.
S-
And so
mhm.
let's work on controlling them. But hell, it's time to take a short break.
And you know what? I'm just thinking this is really appropriate because our sponsor has a message that we all need more kindness in our lives.
It's the truth.
And so let's listen in from our sponsor. We got a short break and then we'll be right back.
Hello, neighbor.
This Thanksgiving,
It's a beautiful day in this neighborhood, a beautiful day for a neighbor. Please won't you be my neighbor?
It only takes one person
We are trying to give the world positive ways of dealing with their feelings. Yeah? Like what?
to inspire a world of kindness.
There are many things you can do.
Based on the true story of the friendship between Mr. Rogers and a cynical journalist.
You love broken people like me.
Sometimes we have to ask for help, and that's okay.
Starring Tom Hanks and Matthew Rhys.
I think the best thing we can do is to let people know that each one of them is precious.
A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. Rated PG. Parental guidance suggested. In theaters November 22nd. For tickets and showtimes, go to resources.abeautifulday.movie.
You know what? I appreciate that word from our sponsor. I want to just say a word about that. We previewed this film several weeks ago, and it's very good.
I loved it. And it's not perfect, but it was so thought-provoking, and it would be a great thing to take your teenagers or your adult kids to, your parents,
Mm-hmm.
because it's about relationships
Mm-hmm.
and restoring relationships. And it would be a great thing to take them to, because it's going to spark some fantastic discussion.
Yeah, and you know what? If your kids haven't grown up watching Mr. Rogers, then you might even want to watch 2 or 3 episodes beforehand just to kind of get the feel of this
Yes.
is the context that this story is going to unfold. Because
Yes.
it's not just about the program, but it's about relationships, about broken relationships and the need for reconciliation, for kindness and love. And
Yes.
and that's not something that goes away when you get too old to watch Mr. Rogers.
Well, that kindness thing and the love thing, that's something that we really need to consider, is the results.
Hmm?
Because when we have broken relationships, we lose our influence.
And that's something I think I remember the first time I had to give that advice. We were at a conference, and a father came up to me and said, "Now look, I've got this conflict. I've got this conflict with my 17-year-old. Um, I can't remember if it was a boy or girl. Sorry about that. But he said, we've got this conflict over a rule that I put in place, and they're just going around it, and they're skirting it, and they're taking shortcuts, and they're just not honoring my directions for this. How can I double down on them and bring them back into line?" And I said, well, here's the deal. Your rule is not a bad rule, except you've got a relationship that's already on the edge, and that 17-year-old knows in a very few months they can walk out that door.
That's right.
They can walk out and not come back, and nothing you say can bring them back. And so at this point, yes, you've got a problem, but I think your problem right now is to lay the foundations for a relationship so that when they are free to go, when they feel the adult wind underneath their wings, that they will still be willing to hear from you. They'll still be willing to come to family events or to ask your advice or listen patiently when you give it unsolicited.
And those same things apply to our own brothers and sisters and our parents.
Hmm.
That, if we allow the relationship to be broken, then we lose all influence over them. We talk about we want them to come to Christ,
Right.
but if we allow the relationship to be broken, we can't share with them. We can't live Christ in front of them, even without a word,
Hmm.
because we've lost contact. And that it can be tempting during the holidays, because sometimes the people who know us best are best at jerking our chains around.
In fact, sometimes that's what they want to do. I mean,
Yes.
sadly enough, some people take a perverse kind of delight into being the troublemaker, making folks feel awkward.
Now, especially I think with unsaved family members towards saved family members, and this I
Hmm.
think is why. Because I noticed a long time ago that sometimes the unsaved people I know, particularly those close to me,
Hmm.
would say, "Why are you shoving your religion down my throat?" And I would look back and realize I had not said one single word about religion, about God, about Jesus Christ, even about morality, Hal, in the time that I'd spent with them.
Yeah,
And I think I figured out what was going on.
yeah.
I think that the Holy Spirit in me was convicting them just because they were in my presence.
Hmm.
And so they're hearing this conviction, and they think I'm saying something and I'm not.
It's like they've got all their shields up against, they're expecting you to judge them and to convict them in some
And
way.
they
And
may be feeling that judgment and conviction from the Holy Spirit.
I mean, just as, there are times when uh, you are expecting trouble from a person,
Yes.
and you have had this conversation in your head 100 times. What am I going to say if they say this? What am I going to say if they bring up that? And you've already had this argument a dozen times before you see them. And when you walk in the door and they say, hello, you get shields up, you're ready for the fight. And even if it doesn't come, that's not just.
And it's not just, but it happens. And I think that is why sometimes they're jerking your chain around, because they feel convicted, they feel guilty, and they want you to be a hypocrite.
They want to take the initiative. If they think,
Yes.
okay, if we're going to have an argument about my girlfriend, then let's have it now. I'm
And
ready for it.
and they think,
You know,
well, I'll show them. They think they're better than I am, and you don't think that, but they're feeling convicted. They're thinking that, and they think, well, I'll show them. I'll make them blow up.
hmm
And we've got to step back and not take this stuff personally, and realize, you know what? This is not about me and them. This is about them and God.
and if you think through your own experience, I think you probably have times like that when you think, why in the world did that set them off so badly? I mean, I didn't say anything. I didn't say anything that should be offensive. I wasn't using bad language, or I wasn't being, judgmental or anything. And yet there was such a reaction. I think oftentimes we have to say, you know what, the Holy Spirit was working on them, and I was just simply a trigger to them, and it wasn't that I did anything wrong or that I was unkind or uncivil, but we just need to recognize that sometimes there's things, people are grappling with things that we can't see yet.
And I think it's times like this it helps to remember verses like, "Blessed are the peacemakers."
Right?
That
For they shall be called the children of God.
the children of God.
hmm
And if we want to have an influence on our family as the children of God, we need to be peacemakers.
hmm
We need to be the ones that aren't causing drama, that aren't getting angry and stomping off, as tempting as it can be,
hmm
that aren't mouthing off, but instead are the ones making peace, being kind, answering not, as the Lord did,
Right. Right.
When the Lord was insulted, he did not answer back.
Truth.
And when we do those things, we show ourselves to be children of God.
Now that excuse me, that kind of plays into one thing. Um, you may be looking forward to with some negative anticipation to the
Yes.
holidays, because this is the time you're going to be confronted with relative X, whoever it is, who may be living in blatant, flagrant sin, or they may have a long-standing grudge, or they may just be a very unpleasant person to have around, and yet you cannot avoid them at the holidays. How do you prepare for that?
Well, I think first you need to realize that that's not their problem.
Ultimately, the fundamental problem of humanity is we're separated from God.
They need Jesus.
Well, I mean, people use that kind of as a line, but
But it's the
actually, the
truth.
truth is we are all in rebellion against God, and we all need forgiveness. We
And
all need redemption.
that's the big problem. They need Jesus.
And so, we have to kind of coach our kids sometimes to say, recognize that an unsaved person is not going to act like a Christian. You cannot expect it. Sometimes they
No.
do. That's a wonderful blessing called common grace. But you can't look at somebody and say, well, why don't they understand this? Well, you know what? The Bible says that the natural man, the one who's not in a right relationship with God, can't even perceive spiritual realities. They just can't
Yes.
see it. And so you have to just expect that. I think one of the things, now this sounds a little bit nuanced, but when we warn, don't have um, preemptive arguments in your head and get yourself primed for disagreement. But at the same time, if you know that this person is coming to your family celebration, and you know that they have a hot button, whatever it is, that's a great time to think to yourself, how can I avoid triggering this person? How can I avoid my children doing something that later we have to have a serious conversation about.
Well, I think we need to
Hmm.
explain to our kids it is not
Hmm.
their job
Hmm.
to judge or criticize or rebuke adults.
Right.
And you can say, look, I know that Uncle such and such, we all know that he's in sin.
Right.
We all know that. And
Yeah.
you know what, kids? He knows it. And
Hmm.
it is not your job to criticize him. Instead, when you want to say something, pray for him.
Right.
Pray for him and be kind to him and show him hospitality, because that from you is more likely to win him than your rebuke.
And we probably need to say that to our teenagers as well, because they have,
Yes.
oh my word, the hypocrisy detector is strong with that one. And yet you need to say, I know that maybe your heart is burning within you to say something very pointed here, but this is not the time and place, and you are not the person to say it to them.
Yes.
You know, you are right in your reaction that you feel like this is an offense to God. Yes, it is.
But God is able to fight this battle without you, son.
And so, you know what? You can talk to your kids ahead of time and say, look, you know, when Aunt Martha, we don't have an Aunt Martha, I'm picking a name at random.
Yes.
When Aunt Martha comes and she's going to want to talk about politics, please don't. Just
Yes.
just just let follow mom's lead, follow dad's lead. It's best if we don't have an argument about this, because guess what? We can't fix it at Thanksgiving dinner.
And so, what are some things you can say?
Yeah.
You can say, "Yes, ma'am. Thank you."
Mm.
You can say, "Thank you. I'll consider that." And that
Mhm.
says, "I heard you. I'm taking you seriously. I will think about what you said, and it's my decision."
Right. Right. And so when your great uncle comes and for the 25th time says, "My word, you're getting fat. You need to lose some weight." And then you can just smile and say blandly, probably wouldn't hurt, would it? And then just let it drop.
Yeah.
Okay, don't get defensive. Don't say it's a glandular condition. It may be, but that's not the issue. Just let it go. And so,
Purpose
mm,
that you want to glorify God in your relationships. How do
mhm,
you do that? By being kind,
mhm,
by showing love,
mhm,
by showing interest in the other person,
mhm.
by asking them how they're doing in their lives and considering it and praying for them, by treating others the way that you want to be treated. If you're going into a situation where everybody believes differently than you don't want them jumping on you.
Well, and that's what this is another thing too. People who are in some sort of ethical moral quandary or struggle, or they're in rebellion against God, or they're running from God, or whatever, they feel that. They get it. God's working on them, but I tell you what, they don't find kindness in their life.
They
The
don't.
people they hang around with, the people that they naturally may choose to associate with, are not going to show them love. And when you can show love and kindness to somebody, even an unpleasant somebody, that can open doors.
Now, what we are not saying is to take Christ out of your celebration.
Absolutely not.
Okay, we're talking about personal one on one interactions. If the Lord moves you to share the gospel,
Right.
but be kind,
Hmm.
okay? But in your celebration, you should be glorifying God.
Hmm.
Go ahead, sing the hymns, read the passages,
Hmm.
talk about it, pray. And what's interesting to me is that our family members who don't know the Lord have loved those traditional aspects of our celebration where we glorify the Lord almost more than the rest of us.
Well, I think that God creates in all men a desire to worship and a
Yes,
desire for the transcendent. And in our secularized, humanistic culture, an awful lot of that just gets written out of the script as if, oh, that's all just hocus pocus. It's make believe, fairy tale type stuff. And yet, in our in our heart of hearts, we're saying, I still feel this need for ritual. I feel this need for
for
traditions.
meaning.
There's something meaning that's missing in my life. And I've seen that even in some remarkable and unexpected places where people respond to the invitation, come in and join our celebration. We are thinking about the transcendent God. We are worshiping the one who created us and sustained us and has blessed us through another year, and you're invited. And it's amazing sometimes the reaction of people who, who it's like, I've been hungering for this and I didn't realize it.
And when you are personally showing kindness and hospitality and love and worshiping the Lord and glorifying Jesus Christ in your celebration, it makes a very, very powerful draw to the gospel to your family and friends.
We were just talking about this with somebody the other day, and they were explaining something really bad that had happened in their lives, and they, through much struggle and prayer, they had been working to forgive the person that did it. And their coworkers who knew about the situation were just astounded, and they were just, they weren't arguing with them. They were just saying, how can you do that? How can you be kind to this person? I mean, they were really confused. How is that even possible? And that is a testimony.
Too much is given, much is required.
Yeah, and that's what, somebody was talking about a situation at work, and they were not a believer at the time, and their boss was, and their boss took the blame for this employee's mistake, and the employee says, "How? Why?" And he said, "Well, because I think about how much God has forgiven me, and I'm a follower of Jesus, and now that I'm in a position, sometimes I get to take the blame for somebody else, just like he did for me." And that just
Wow.
blew her out of the water.
And so, folks, as we move into the holidays,
Hmm.
let's guard our relationships. Let the law of kindness rule our tongues
Hmm.
and look for an opportunity to glorify God in this.
Right. So, look, we hope that you have a blessed Thanksgiving, a wonderful holiday. Remember, this is an error-likely situation. You gotta pray, take a deep breath, but may God bless you in every respect, in all of your gatherings and in the preparation for them.
And head over to our site.
Hmm.
We've got some amazing sales going on at raisingrealmen.com.
Right.
And we'd be grateful if you would review our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, and iHeartRadio.
Oh, that would be awesome. Okay, look, we look forward to talking with you again sometime as we try to take biblical principles into 21st century family life. Until next time, I'm Hal.
And I'm Melanie.
Thanks for listening.
Bye, y'all.
You've been listening to Making Biblical Family Life Practical with Hal and Melanie Young. If you found this program interesting, challenging, and encouraging, why not join us on the web at halandmelanie.com. That's HALANDMELANIE.com. Or follow us on social media. You can find us on Facebook at Facebook/Hal and Melanie or Facebook.com/Raising Real Men. This program is a production of the Ultimate Homeschool Radio Network. Join us next week when we'll be back to talk about making biblical family life practical. Until then, thank you and God bless you for listening.